Sound Speeds, and welcome back to the Sound Speeds podcast. Now, every single week, I try to address two different topics. If you have any questions that you would like to ask me, then please send me an email at alan@soundspeeds.us and ask me the question that you're just itching to have me answer here in the podcast. But let's waste no more time and get right into our content. Until recently, if we went shopping, then we might often hear Muzak being played in the store. Muzak being music that's like generic and people are going to be like, what is this stuff that we're listening to? It's not been anything that you recognize. But a few years ago, and by that I mean as of the time of this recording, we started seeing a resurgence of people wanting to play actual music. Originally, it started as people just playing radio channels, then progressed onto something like XM or Sirius satellite radio. And then now we're starting to run into a lot of companies that are making their own radio. Now, one of the things that is kind of interesting is that if you listen to a lot of the music that's being played on them, they're kind of tailored to the time frame of the people that are going to be going in there. If you go in late night or overnight, then you're most likely going to be hearing some of the greatest hits from people over maybe the past 10 years, combined with a few of the greatest hits from maybe the past couple of decades. But most of the time, if you're there early in the morning, then you're going to be hearing different kinds of music than you will be in the afternoon and early to evening. This is because, just like with a radio station, they're trying to program the music to the people that are going to be there, hopefully so that way they're going to want to stay there a little bit longer and enjoy themselves more. But if you've been paying attention, sometimes there's a little bit of something different in a song when you hear it on one of those radio stations than it is if you listen to the actual album version. So why do you think grocery store radio sometimes plays different versions than actual radio? Well, one of the big reasons is licensing. Let's go back over 100 years to 1914 when ASCAP, or the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, was created, basically to help to protect the rights and the broadcast rights, or rather the financial interests of the composers and authors and publishers that were in the ASCAP. But because it was so difficult to get in, the Broadcast Music Incorporated, or BMI, was created in 1939 to do the same kind of thing, but it was a little bit easier to get in. And then at the same time in Europe, CSEC actually was created that did the same kind of thing, and that was in the 1930s as well. So between those three, ASCAP, BMI, and CSEC, licensing for all the music that you know is basically created, or at least it was. Now, this day and age, you can actually pay certain services in order to get licenses to play music. And one of the big outlets for that this day and age is grocery store radio. So if you go to a grocery store, sometimes you want to hear certain music played by the actual official band that played it, but you might recognize it as being a little bit different than something you recognize. And why? Because it's cheaper to have licensed. If you don't want to get the actual version of the song that's still very similar because it's the same people and the same artist that actually performed it originally, you're going to say, well, this is a little bit different than I'm used to, but people are pretty forgiving as long as it's the same artist that you recognize. Think about how many times you go to a concert and the musician that you go to see or the band plays something differently than you recognize it to be on their album. Most people are forgiving of that. Like me personally, I like to just listen to the way it is on the CD. And when I've gone to concerts, I see they're not playing it the way that I'm used to hearing it. And I don't like concerts for that reason. But a lot of people do not share my opinion and they think I'm crazy for it. But when you go to a grocery store, they're taking advantage of that and taking advantage also of the cheaper licensing on some forms of music that you're wanting to listen to in there. Not all of it. But if some songs sound a little bit different, chances are it's because it was available for license on the grocery store radio station for a little bit cheaper. This next topic is probably going to annoy some people, but it's got to be said because it's honestly a big fear I have about going forward. And that is sound mixers. You're starting to get lazy. And this is something that I anticipate is something that could end up costing your job if you're not careful. Let me explain. Let's go back to when things were analog. It was the sound mixer, usually mixing down one boom, maybe two booms down to one track, along with maybe any plants that might be out. Very seldomly wireless. As soon as we added in multiple cameras and we started adding in multiple booms and multiple plants and then laving every single person, sound mixers started to isolate track recording of every single one of those sound sources. Well, I hate to tell you this, sound mixers, but this day and age, if you talk to a lot of post mixers, they're not using your mix track anymore. They're using their own mix track because it's very easy for them to have their assistants scrub all the audio tracks, make it clean, and then for them to retrospectively know how the track needs to be actually played for the scene and then do it. So that mix track that you've been working so hard on and that boom operators and sound utilities and everybody go crazy about is actually being used only as for the dailies and for people on set to listen to. Now, the reason I say sound mixers are starting to get lazy is because I'm starting to run into a lot of sound mixers that are not bothering to understand the gear that they're using anymore. Old school sound mixers, especially those that are close to retirement, they're saying, look, I don't need to understand the gear. I'm just trying to go through the next couple of years, ride the same equipment I have, find good teams that are going to handle everything for me, and then retire. Well, this is quite dangerous of a mentality to have because some of these mixers will say, oh yeah, cool, a kid coming out of film school. They understand how to use this gear. I'm going to hire them as a utility and then, continue to work and it's going to be great. But sound mixers that don't understand their own gear, let me set this up for you, okay? Maybe not going to affect you as much as what could happen in the next few years. And that is that we are starting to see a big trend as things are going digital for everything to become more in the world of isolated tracks that goes to post. And we're even starting to see things like auto mix come into play a lot more. And we're starting to see with the innovations created through Dante of basically taking all your audio tracks, not even routing them analog through your system anymore, but now it goes through one little Cat 5, Cat 6, something like that cable. What's to say that can't be at the other side of the world? Or maybe there's going to be a farm of a bunch of sound mixers in Los Angeles that are sitting there at computers waiting to mix. And then boom operators and sound utilities are the only ones that are going to be on set. What's to say that we're not going to have an obsolete position on set of sound mixers? We all know that sound mixers are the department head and they take up most of the budget of the sound department. With the equipment rental, with their increased rates over the boom operator and sound utility, what's to say that sound mixers won't be phased out or being sent remotely to another area of the country or the world? It's not quite as far-fetched as you might think, because think about where we're looking at right now with AI. AI has taken big, huge leaps. That's one of the reasons why, as of the time of this recording, AI is a huge, big thing that's being negotiated about between IATSE, between the Teamster, so maybe not so much the Teamsters, but the Teamsters are definitely seeing how IATSE, SAG-AFTRA, and the Writers Guild have been negotiating towards AI, and they're going to be upping their own negotiations a little bit because of all the increased things that we've been asking for as well. So it's going to be one of those things that comes to a head at some point because AI is affecting our industry, no question. Think about Adobe Podcast AI. Even me, when I recorded this video right here.
And this is just obviously an approximation of how far away it is. And again, if you're not using any sort of a microphone, a lavalier microphone, which I am definitely not wearing, you can see that I'm quite literally making all these noises while facing the camera and touching the jacket that I'm wearing, backing up 2 more feet. And if you are still able to hear me at this point in time, even though there's about to be another car that's passing by behind the camera, and I take that back, there's another one right there, then I call this quite effective.
It blew a lot of people's minds that it could be that far away from the camera and it sounded that good. Now, granted, it's still not ideal. It's still by no means where it should be. It's not perfect in any way. If you get close to it, it's very prominent in the bass, but it's also in its genesis stage. So what's to say that there's not going to be some experimentation going on with having people completely isolated to the other side of the country and mixing, but then have a team that is cheaper, basically a boom operator and a sound utility, maybe even a tech that's in charge of wireless and maybe routing and maybe engineering the sound rig right there on set. What's to say that person right there that makes everything cooperative work doesn't take everything into this little bitty box? And you may say, well, no, a sound mixer needs to be there on set. Why? From a producer's perspective, why? To go to the meetings? Yes, maybe, but that could also easily be another member of the sound department, like the boom operator, because the boom operator also has to be very part of many things with regards to planning. What's to say that now that we have department heads, gaffers, and key grips with their best boys, And we have costumers and we have every other department head going, what's to say that boom operators and sound utilities couldn't go along on those meetings? And then they know where Video Village is going to be set up. They're going to know how the lighting is going to come into play, that kind of thing. They're the ones that actually affects more, doesn't it? Sure, a sound mixer will go to these meetings and they'll learn a lot of things, and they will be the ones that say it needs to be this way for the sound department, but an experienced boom operator and a sound utility would be able to do the same thing. Maybe not with the same amount of experience, but then a lot of the sound mixers that I'm running into are younger. They're coming out of film school, and within 2 or 3 years, they think they're ready to be a sound mixer. And when the old school sound mixers retire, what's to say those guys aren't going to be the ones that come up and expect to be the sound mixers that are working with teams that have 5, sometimes 10 times their experience? It's very dangerous, the position that we're in right now, where we are not understanding our own gear. You've heard me talk about it even in the last episode of the Sound Speeds podcast. It's a very, very scary thing right now, the position that we're in right now. And I don't want sound mixers to get so complacent and think that we're just going to be there forever, or you're going to be there forever, because boom operators and sound utilities, we're not guaranteed positions either. Now, it's one of those things where when AI is involved, we're trying to shut that down. But what's to say there's not going to be something else that pops up? Or maybe they're going to start figuring out a new way to segue in to make it cheaper, because we all know how they love to nitpick down and say, we just don't have the budget to hire you for your particular rate. As if the sound department's the most expensive department there on set. We're one of the cheapest. We're not like props that have to get every single little bitty prop from sometimes various different places, or 3D print it, and then you have to get specialty props made. We're not like set building, where you have to build sets and then you say, you know what, this piece doesn't even work. Let's not shoot there. Let's shoot somewhere else instead. Or costumes that don't just go on big shopping sprees locally, but also bring in stuff from other cities when needed. Special effects wardrobe, even better. So the sound department is one that's nickeled and dimed to death. Please do not arm producers and the like with more knowledge of basically saying, you know what? If the sound mixers are not as involved and we're not getting as much out of them, I really am scared that them not understanding our industry. I know the value of a sound mixer on set. Believe me, I understand. But from a producer perspective, what does a sound mixer do? This. They think you just mix a track down. Now, they understand that you're the department head, but then in many circumstances, the boom operator and the sound utility handle a lot of things for the department. So sound mixers, please don't become complacent. Please don't become lazy. Get yourself involved in the process. Because if you don't, you may be talking yourself, maybe not yourself per se, but your fellow next generation of sound mixers out of a job. I really don't want it to seem like all I'm being in these Sound Speeds podcasts is negative. What I'm really trying to do is bring awareness, because I see certain trends. I see things that make me a little fearful. And I also understand the sound department. I don't want to see that change. As a matter of fact, I think we need to have one additional person, someone in charge of radio frequency coordination, not just for the sound department, but for the entire set, for the entire production. Because think about how many different things we have. We have Teradex. We have all the different stuff that, sure, the electricians are doing. We have all the different wireless communication on set. We have the walkies, which usually intermod and have certain issues with our own transmitting frequencies in the UHF realm that we deal with in the sound department. There's a lot of conflictions that could happen from different wireless frequencies out there. And I really think that there needs to be some sort of an RF coordinator position. But trying to convince producers of that, that's a different issue altogether. And I really don't want them to think, and I'm already seeing some pushback as to, do you really need 3 people? I mean, I've heard it actually said where they're like, the sound mixer doesn't do anything. He can get out of the chair and wire somebody. Do we really want to get to the point where we have producers that literally think that a sound mixer does nothing? I've already seen producers change their mentality in the past couple of years. One show I was on, a producer got really annoyed with catering because they were not able to put food out quick enough during the COVID era. And so he fired the caterers and it's the best caterer that we have in Atlanta. And he brought in food trucks all day. It was cheaper and it was fresher and it was different food that people were very appreciative of because it came out of a food truck that was hot right there on set, and the variety changed every single day. It wasn't the same restaurant every single day that you could order different food from. It was constantly different. And you would literally see a place that would come in there with carnival style food. And then an hour and a half later, there was an Asian fusion truck that would show up. And then an hour and a half after that, there was another type of truck that would show up. And that happened all day long. 5 or 6 food trucks would show up all day long. And it was cheaper for the producers to do that than hire caterers. Well, now we're post-COVID. He's probably still doing that. I don't want to see our department start to get slammed and have there be cutbacks and recessions in the sound department for the same kind of reason. So I'm trying to bring awareness. I don't know the solution, but what I'm asking is for people to be aware of this, try to think of solutions, make yourself more valuable, and to try to think of ways that we can be more valuable on set and more involved. That's the big kicker right there, becoming more involved. So thanks for tuning in this episode of the Sound Speeds podcast, and be sure to tune in the next episode where I talk about something else, hopefully in a more positive light, and as always, bring you more sound advice. Have a question you'd like answered or want to add something? Be sure to write it in the comment section down below. You can also make a suggestion for future topics of discussion. Again, comment section down below, or you can email me at soundspeeds@yahoo.com. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss out on future sound advice.